could we get code folding to happen in App Designer without modifying App Designer?
That is like magic. Where did that come from?
You can tell it to use something as a Git repository. I have dark mode. And you can change anything, basically, in the code editor. There's no modifications to any delivered App Designer binary.
Tim, thank you so much for joining Graham and I to talk about your new project. So if you wouldn't mind, Tim, give us a quick introduction to you, what you do, and then we'd love to hear more about this new project.
Sure. My name's Tim Slater. I've been working with PeopleSoft for 14, almost 15 years. I've been with Intricacy, which is now Gideon Taylor, for 11 of those years. My current role is lead software engineer. I'm predominantly focused on our AI chatbot offerings using Oracle Digital Assistant and some other AI providers and stuff. But in my free time, sometimes I work on little utilities that help make a PeopleSoft developer's life a little easier. So,
And Tim, there are some amazing projects out there in your GitHub repository, and the community is incredibly grateful for the work you've done on those. Thank you so much.
And
I
I have to
appreciate
say,
that.
it's great to meet the person behind the code of those utilities that we know and love so well. Great to meet you, Tim.
I appreciate
And I
that.
have to say, Tim, when I look at those utilities, I think Tim has got to be one of the smartest people in the PeopleSoft community, because these things are absolutely amazing, super needed. So we are all very grateful.
Awesome. Well, thank you. You mentioned previous utilities. I've worked on ones for like trace files and DMS files, which we can look at a bit later. But this current utility focuses on the developer experience for application designer. I've worked in PeopleSoft systems for like 14 years or so, and the one feature that I have wanted since I started was the ability to do code folding, right? The ability to collapse code in App Designer.
Yeah.
I've wanted it all of those years.
It isn't that Dan Iverson's primary request? I think every
Yes.
time we go to a People Tools roundtables at the end of each session, I think I remember seeing a hand go up. When are we getting code folding?
Yep. And there, I forget how to get to it, but there's like a PeopleSoft ideas page that Oracle has, and the top voted comment or the top voted idea still to this day is code folding.
That's funny.
So,
That's funny.
but this adventure, I guess, kind of started with that being the sole purpose: is could we get code folding to happen in App Designer without modifying App Designer, right? And what would that take? And so, do you want to see it first or
Yes, yeah,
background?
please go ahead. Yes. So I have
Okay.
your screen up now.
Okay. So yeah, this is just some delivered People Tools class that I've opened up, and it looks, I guess, like we've all grown used to. But if you start up this utility called App Refiner, and we'll go through some of what these settings are and stuff in a little bit. Once it's open, and you have your settings set to however you like, you can kind of just forget about it. Ignore that just for a second. And we have code folding. I can collapse methods. You can collapse for loops, ifs, basically any indentation. You can collapse them now.
That is like magic.
And
Where did that come from?
so I'm really glad you asked, because it kind of leads into how does that work. So this will work with People Tools 858 and higher. And the reason for that is because in 858, PeopleSoft moved to a new editor, or a new editing library for their code editor, and they use a library called Scintilla. It's the same editor that Notepad++ uses, for example. And one of the things that makes Scintilla interesting is how they handle their platform abstraction, because it's cross-platform. And the way they do it is they make the editor itself all message-based. So anything that you can change in the editor can be done by sending a message to the window. And the beautiful thing on Windows is you can send those across processes. So what happened is when App Refiner detected that we had a People Tools Scintilla editor focused, it sent the appropriate messages to turn on code folding, to turn on the margin, to set the styles, and then set the folding levels for each line. In 860 and below, we have to set the folding levels, or App Refiner does. In 861, it happens automatically because of an upgrade to the Scintilla library that they're using. It automatically sets the folding levels. But yeah, it is pure magic. And so once I noticed that it was Scintilla and that you can send all the commands to do this, I mean, of course, the next question is, what else can we do, right?
Hmm.
You may notice, or so I guess before I go into some of these other pieces, let's talk about the settings here. Um, you can tell it to auto collapse. Basically, when App Refiner first sees a window and it initializes the code folding, it will collapse all the top level definitions. I almost never use it.
Hmm.
Oh, you can tell it to only do people code editors because here's something neat. It happens to work for SQL. Like there's code folding
Mm-hmm.
in on SQL. So, but you can tell it, hey, like don't touch my HTML or my SQL editors, right? Only my people code editor. Um, this this one you should probably never use. It's here just to show what we can really do. Auto dark mode. So if I close out of this editor and I open it back up, I have dark mode. And
I like that.
we can change anything basically in the code editor. I'm going to turn that off because I know there are people that feel very strongly about dark mode. So, um, okay, so that's that. Format SQL. This one's a fun one. Um, I don't know about you, but I'm not a big fan of how PeopleSoft forces the formatting of the SQL. So we can actually do a really neat trick here, and we can get the SQL text from the editor, format it with a formatting library, put the SQL text back in formatted, and then tell the editor that nothing has changed.
Hmm.
The benefit to that is you can close it and you won't get prompted for editing or for saving, right? And you can edit it in this new, I think, easier to read format. And then when you hit save, Tools does its thing and it saves it in its format. But then visually, you see it in a different formatting. Um, you've probably saw this prompt for DB connection. This is not strictly required. There are some things that are enhanced if you do. Um, and the DB connection can either take bootstrap credentials, right? Or if you have a read-only user for the database, you can authenticate with that because it is purely read-only. It does not edit anything. We'll get to. I'll show you the pairs, quotes, and parentheses in just a second. But a notable thing here is App Refiner does support plugins. So from everything else I'll show you in these following tabs, people can write their own, compile it in a DLL, and have App Refiner load their custom linting rules or styles or tooltips. A recent feature is you can tell it to use something as a Git repository. And so I'm just going to come into, I have a folder already set up. Now, this isn't good for like, I guess the actual Git repository, it stores the files by database and then definition type, right? And it does the people code HTML to SQL. But what it's really for is if I come in and I just open up another one of these, so it sees it, it's already checked this in to the Git repository. It's
Whoa.
transparent to you. But then if you do, I'm just gonna make a new thing here, local string test, right? I saved it. It put that in the Git repository.
Whoa.
And then I guess what's worth noting is this isn't the predominant way that you will interact with App Refiner when it's running.
Mm-hmm.
This is for if you want to change settings, you can activate certain things, right? The predominant way is Control Shift P, or if you're on a Mac going through remote desktops, Command Shift P, I think, and it will open up the App Refiner command palette right here in App Designer. Or it's not in, but it's modal too, right? So
Yeah.
you have to dismiss this. But we can revert to a previous version, and it will show you the date and time that it was snapshotted. You can diff, and you can see that if I
Oh,
revert to this, it's going to delete that line.
that is
And then
nice.
if you want it, revert to selected,
That's
and it
amazing.
will.
Great job, Tim. That's amazing.
And then you can save, right?
That's
And
amazing.
then
Yes.
that actually put in a third commit, right? So this one and this one actually are the same, right? So and anytime the editor changes or we enter a save state, technically, or save point, it does this across the databases. So if I had like this database and another one, they share the same repository, but the top level
Mhm.
folder is the database name. And it's
Mm.
just, it doesn't get pushed anywhere. It's purely local and it's just for the revert. Another feature that we have with App Refiner is stylers. And you may have noticed that this top line up here is grayed out. And that is a styler that indicates that that import is not used currently in this code base. You'll see a few others here. Um, like sorry, there's a new feature and I'm not familiar with this color, so I need to check that out. But there's stylers for like unused variables.
Mhm.
And over on the style on App Refiner, um, if so, this top one requires the database. If you do the DB connection as you're typing, and like say you typo an app class, it'll underline it with like a red squiggly saying that it's an invalid app class. Um, Meaningless variable names like x, foo, ret,
Hmm.
those can get colored. This is one of my favorites. This is an application class that has a property that you reference using the ampersand outside of the constructor.
Hmm.
So instead of using like this
Okay.
percent this dot property, and it's not necessarily wrong, right? But it's a way at a glance to tell that's not a variable, it's a property.
Right.
Um, anything and looks for comments that have to do fix me, right? Those get special
Mhm.
colors.
Hmm.
Nice.
Um, Variables that are so this is the newest one that I haven't fully tested, but basically unused variables, or I'm sorry, variable undefined variables, unused imports, and then unused local and private instance variables. So if we go over to some code that has an unused variable, you'll see that it gets colored, right? Um, any of these can be turned on and off, and like I said, uh, people can write their own. It's written in C sharp, and so um, uh, hopefully these serve as good enough examples for people to work off of to customize their own if they so choose. Um, we we also happily accept issues at the on the GitHub for
Hmm.
ideas to integrate. There's absolutely no promises that they will, but we would be curious to find what people besides me might find useful.
And Tim, these um, styles that you're showing here, are these capitalizing on native features of Scintilla? Does it have a parser in
Uh,
there somewhere that
so
you're utilizing?
No, and actually, I'm really glad you mentioned this. No, this is leveraging. There's somebody. I wish I remembered his name. It's referenced in our README on the repository. But there's a person that 4 years ago did a master's thesis on code analyzing for people code of all things, and they wrote an Antler is a common or a popular parser generator.
Yep.
They wrote a complete Antler grammar for people code, and they released it under the MIT license, so people are free to use it. And so this is actually uh, it's asking the Scintilla editor for a copy of the text, and then it's running the parser on the app refiner side, getting the syntax tree, and then the stylers are leveraging that. And actually, all of these leverage those: the stylers, the linters, and the tooltips. So next, after the stylers, probably the next easiest thing to show is tooltips. Um, the easiest one to demonstrate is I can just hover over anything that's highlighted, and it will tell me like what that highlight means. Because when I was first showing this, people are like, "Well, what does the gray mean?" Right? I knew what it meant, but this now shows you, right? Similarly, we can hover probably over this one. Undefined variable is what it thinks, and of course, it's because this is a method parameter. So I need to fix that. But what you will also notice is I can hover over a variable, and it will tell me information about that variable, that it's a local variable, that it's an integer, right? Another tooltip. I don't know if I have. Does this use markers? It doesn't use one directly. Here, if you have the DB connection on, I can actually hover over a record dot, and it will tell me the fields, what the key fields were. You can do so this dot, right? So this is a method in this class. I can hover over it and it'll show me what the parameters are. So I don't have to scroll
Oh,
back up
that's
to the class declaration.
nice. Very
And
nice.
this will traverse parent classes. So because you can do this dot and call a method that's in your parent
Sure.
class. Otherwise, you have to go view definition on the parent class, right? And then you have to flip back. This will traverse that for you and find the method for you. So you can stay right here where you're working is the idea. Another fun tooltip one that we have is if you go to something that's reasonably like, I guess pretend this method's a lot longer than it is. If you hover over the first token in a line, it will show you that you're in a method, in a for loop, in an if, right? It'll show you like the conditional scopes that you're in.
Right. Wonderful.
And then so in this particular case, there's actually two tooltips that apply for where we're hovering, right? Because we're also hovering over a variable, and it just appends that to the next. So you can see both tooltips at the same time.
Yeah.
Is kind of how that one works. So yeah, I think that covers most of the tooltips. Now for the so there's one in here that isn't actually there's no tab for it. This is something that you can make your own via a plugin, but we do support some refactoring. Refactoring in PeopleSoft is difficult, right? Because you really only have this piece of code open, and there's no good way to say find me all code that calls this method, right? So can't rename this method. But what we can rename is things like private variables, instance variables, local variables, like local to a method or a function, parameter names, right? So those are all just self-contained in here. And so the easiest way to do it is, let's just say we wanted to change this rec name here to record name. I can do this from here. I can do it from here, or I can do it from a usage. It doesn't matter. If you open up the command palette, you can find it in here. Rename, but you'll also notice that there's a shortcut specifically for this one, Control Shift R. And so if I have my cursor inside the definition, Control Shift R, I can rename it. And let's just rename it record name. And it updates it here, there, and the scope appropriate usages for it. If there was something down here, like see, this one still had rec name, but it didn't rename this one. It renamed it specifically for the method that it's used in. So it is scope aware refactoring.
So that's incredibly powerful. I mean, that was
That
way
is
better than
amazing.
a Control H replace all,
Yeah.
Yes.
or a Control H and replace independently clicking through the buttons. This was scope aware, not just
Yep.
in the little function block itself or method block, but also in the signature. That's
Yep.
impressive.
Yes.
Um,
Very.
another one that I really like. I'm just going to switch over to this class here. Say so we can see this class has no imports, and say for whatever reason in this getter I need to use another class, right? And I know it's ADS common is the class. Create ADS common. Now at this point, if I save, of course, it's going to error, right? No import.
Right.
Control-Shift-I resolved my imports for me. They put it up there for me.
Wow.
And so the resolve imports, it goes through, finds all the app classes, and it generates a distinct, a concrete list. So no wildcard imports. And then yeah, it keeps your cursor right where it's at, so you can just keep on coding. So I think that's um internally we have a convention of putting a flower box up at the top, for like change tracking, like who changed it and when.
Yes.
I hate having to go find an example and then gut it, and then so I made a specific one for add flower box, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. It adds a flower box with today's date.
Lovely.
So, okay, so that's refactors. The remaining one here is linters. And this is where it gets really fun, if you ask me, is we have a bunch of So I guess for those that aren't aware with the terminology, a linter is like a code smell or code style. It's not something that's inherently wrong, but it could be, or it's at least worth looking at, right? As an example, if you have something that's like 8 if else deep, right? Maybe you should look at refactoring that because it's probably not good, right? So we have a variety of them. I'm not going to demonstrate all of them, but for example, we can detect empty catch blocks. And some of them do have configurations. This will allow an empty catch block if it has a comment in it, for example. Uh, Functions that have too many parameters. If you have a function that's taking 13 parameters, you might be better off making a class that has 13 properties and passing the class, for example. Where these are really powerful is in the SQL objects, HTML objects, and SQL exec. Those I will show. Another one here. This isn't really a linter, like so much as that it's a code smell, but this one will go ahead and collect all to-dos, fix-me's, and notes, and it will put a summary at the bottom of the code. Um, so I guess let me show you what the linter does. I I have an example of some particularly horrendous code that absolutely would not run at runtime. It saves, it compiles, but it would absolutely not run. And so there is a shortcut for linting the current editor, Control Alt L, but you can just get to it through the command palette too. Just type in lint, and we can do inline annotations that show you what rules particular lines failed. So, for example, the too many parameters has too many parameters, right? Before I get into some of these other SQL-based ones, what it does support is, say you're like, you know what, I know that's too many, at least for the linter, but in this one particular case, it's fine. You can there's a suppress report, and it will put in, you can say suppress for the current line, and it will put in a comment that tells App Refiner to ignore this particular linting rule for this line. You can suppress per line, per block, like method or whatever, or for the whole file, and it'll just ignore that linter for that one file. Let me rerun the linters here. So some of these other linting rules, with a database connection, which again isn't required, but for some things allows it to do a little bit more, we can actually validate bind parameters on SQL objects. So this knows that the SQL object expects 2 binds, but you only gave it 1. And that's not something that you would know today, except for running the code and then it erroring at runtime. And now we can check it here. And if we do go look at this SQL, sure enough, it has 2. Right? For create SQLs that have a plain, like just a SQL string, that doesn't require the database, obviously. Additionally, we can actually validate the output columns. Like this knows that SQL has 10 output columns, but you only provided 2 variables. People code will allow you to pass in like an array of any to capture however many columns come back. But we have a linter that, or the linter is smart enough to know you passed in one, but it was a string, right? It's not an array. So, and we have all of these linting rules more or less work for the SQL exec as well, except that doesn't have like dot fetch and dot open and whatnot. So yeah, lots of the SQL ones, expressions too long, right? Smaller parts. You can check for long literal SQL, right? Instead of putting like a 1,000-line SQL string, maybe make it a SQL object. This is one of my favorites, is that we can detect if somebody is using string concatenation in a SQL. Of course, there are edge cases where that is something that you do have to do, but at that point you could suppress that lint report or that lint, right?
To avoid SQL injection attacks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Empty. So here's an example of it showing the empty catch block, right? Which so the color codings here is, generally speaking, the red would lead you to a runtime error of some sort. The yellow is like worth looking at, and then there's this color, like the gray background, that's just kind of a note. So yeah, this is like an if-else-if chain, right? And it might be, this is a contrived example, of course, if true, if false, but just to show that the nesting, detecting that. And it detects this one as like a candidate for an evaluate statement, as where for this one, it just knows, hey, this is deeply nested, right? There's like 4 levels of ifs in here. Maybe refactor it, right? Good old SQL has a wild card because it works until it doesn't.
Yes.
Right.
I've never done that before.
And then we have one here for if you declared it as an object, but you gave it a concrete type, right? Because it's not necessary, really. And you'll note that it does allow this one, or I mean it doesn't report this one because you are using create object, right? So there's probably a very good reason that you defined it as object here.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and then I think I got rid of this linter because I don't know how often it's actually used, or maybe I just don't have it turned on. Yeah, I think I got rid of it. I used to have one that would make sure that a recursive method had an exit condition type of thing. So, but yeah, so that's linting on a single file. You can also, and I don't have a project open. If you do have a DB connection, you can lint a project, and it will generate a new report. And you can filter it to component people code or whatever, and only the errors. And then you can expand the errors, and you can see what lines they're on, and so on.
That's breathtaking.
This does need a DB connection, of course, to look up like the project items and whatnot. But yeah, the final thing I guess on here is templates. So you can do user-defined templates. It does not require a code change. All it needs is a template file, and I'll show you an example here. Plain class. So there's a little bit of JSON up at the top that describes like input parameters, and then there's the actual template at the bottom. If you put a new one in this folder, restart App Refiner, the template is available. But a common thing that we have to deal with at Gideon Taylor using one of Intrisy's products is, actually, let me get back into that app class here. We have a product, Decision Engine. You can make like a dynamic input. And so usually what you have to do, right, is you have to go find an existing one, hope it wasn't too big, gut it out, and then here we can just say apply a template, and I can say I want a decision input, and then I can apply template, and it will do it for me. Or on the GT side, We have some, and it knows that it's going to be replacing the content, right? You can also just do a plain class, and it'll do that. And
Hmm.
so you can customize that to your heart's content, and it'll just work. So yeah, I think that covers most of it. Oh, okay. So this is something you wouldn't notice until you were actually like writing code in here. Watch this. You see where my cursor is? I just did a new
Yes.
line. It's
Yep.
indented.
Mm.
Oh,
4x
right.
equals 1, 2, 3. It's auto indented.
Right.
Oh.
Usually they're all left aligned until you press save and then it auto formats.
Code here, and then it de-indents for you.
Yeah, yes, yeah, lovely.
Yeah. So that auto parenthesis and quote pairing, some like it, some don't. But if you do like local string foo equals, and I type in one quote, it typed in the second quote for me,
Oh.
right? And then if you forget that it put in that second quote and you type one, it just hops
Ignores
over
you.
Yes.
or it
Yeah,
forgets.
Yes.
yeah.
And it does the same
And
thing with parentheses.
auto semicolons at the end of the lines.
That would be nice, but oh, but so you say that. Oh, one thing that it will do is if I do like this and I hit semicolon, it'll put it on the outside of the quote for me.
Oh, no way.
Um, I do currently have it set to where, if this was if we were doing like, this dot method, right? And you had to do a parameter of, test string, and you did a comma, it puts the comma on the outside as well.
Yeah.
Oh, you've just
So you
showed
can
me
go
that.
to your,
That's a favorite feature.
so
Yeah.
you can do this. Yeah,
Love that.
it's a favorite feature until you're trying to type a string that needs a comma in it,
Yes.
and then it's quite annoying.
Yes. Yes.
Um, so here's something interesting: is that those two features, the auto format and the auto parenthesis and or parenthesis and quote, they actually outlive AppRefiner. If you close AppRefiner, we still have equals one,
Oh,
two, three.
so the
We still
messages
have
that have been sent into the editor and it's still
yeah.
maintaining the
Well, so
behavior.
so this one is a bit more. I guess I'll try to stay out of the weeds,
Mm,
but this is actually so from App Refiner, like the outside looking in, right? It can send messages and it can get answers, right? So it can do kind of like any sort of inspection of the editor that it wants. But what it can't do is know when certain events happen, right?
right.
You saved the editor, you
Mm,
inserted a character. Those kind of events, what Scintilla does is Scintilla actually will send those messages to its parent window. It doesn't know to send them to App Refiner because we want to know about them too, right?
mm,
Right.
So there's some Windows APIs that you can leverage to basically like subclass the parent window and such that anytime a message gets sent to the parent window, it will run a little bit of code. And we have a small DLL C++ that gets loaded in so that it can effectively pre-process these messages. And then certain messages that App Refiner cares about, for example, like for tooltips, like when you hover and the mouse is still for 1 second, Scintilla sends an event. Well, now that we're listening to those events, App Refiner can do something, right? And it sends the message to show the tooltip.
Mm,
But that's a lot of back and forth to proxy all of those events, especially if somebody's typing, right? That's a lot of events for character added. And so the character added event is actually handled directly in the DLL that's running or that's handling the subclassing in App Designer.
mm.
And so when you close App Refiner, that DLL and the subclass is still there. And so it's not on purpose. It just happened that
And that's because the DLL loads when App Designer starts, not when the
yeah.
refiner starts. Yeah.
Well, so the App Designer, if you just load App Designer by itself, it's just normal App Designer. If you once you have App Refiner and it detects an editor, it will instruct App Designer to load that DLL to do
mm,
the
Right. Yeah.
subclassing.
Yeah.
Yep. But then it stays, right?
Right.
So, but yeah, that's this one.
That's impressive.
It's,
Uh,
uh,
yeah.
I just wanted code folding,
And you just didn't stop there. You couldn't stop,
No,
right?
I couldn't stop. Couldn't.
Yeah.
That
A-
is an impressive piece of engineering, Tim. Congratulations.
I appreciate it. Nah, thank you
Mm.
guys for letting me show it off.
And just to clarify, you have
Mhm.
not changed a PSID or any Oracle delivered binaries at all. It's
Correct.
100% running in a separate process that uses Windows messaging to
Yeah.
communicate.
With the exception of that event hook,
Yeah,
which is still app refiner code. So, but that code is running in the app designer
in process.
process.
Yes.
Mm.
But there's no modifications to any delivered app designer binary. It's completely unmodified. And due to Scintilla being open source, they like didn't need to do any sort of like reverse engineering or like peeking under the covers of how does it do this, because it's actually kind of funny. When I was first testing out App Refiner, I wasn't even using App Designer. I was doing it against Notepad++ because they have a Scintilla editor,
Wow.
right? That's how agnostic it is
Mm.
to where the
Yes.
Scintilla editor is running. Yeah.
Right. And Tim, I want to ask you about the name
Mhm.
because there seems to be a relationship between the Oracle delivered name and your
Yeah. Well, I mean,
product name.
I couldn't call it Application Designer, but I could find something that rhymes, right? So, App Refiner.
Yes, refining the
So,
experience of
Very
App
nice.
Designer. Yes,
Yep.
clever, clever.
Very.
and I don't know how well it will show, but the icon is an open wrench being refined on a blacksmith's
On a
anvil.
forge. Yeah, I love it. That's great.
So
That's clever. Yes. And so, Tim, tell us about delivery.
yeah, so this will be available on GitHub on the Gideon Taylor organization. Um, it will go live shortly after this podcast. You can see we have some of my other utilities out here already, but we will put this live as soon as this recording is done.
And so I assume
And
GitHub, you said you got pull requests and things you said that you would review.
yep,
So the source code would be there, of course.
yep,
Will it also have a packaged binary for download?
yes,
Okay,
yes,
cool.
it will. Yep.
Yes.
There'll be a releases tab.
Ah,
As far as requirements go, this runs on .NET 8 framework. So if uh, the delivered release is built assuming that you have .NET 8 installed. If you do not have .NET 8 installed on the system, you can do what's called a self-contained build through .NET,
Mhm.
and it will basically like wherever you're building it, obviously has to have the .NET SDK, right? But then
right.
you build it, and it includes all of the .NET 8 framework DLL files alongside the application. It's I think it's unzipped. It's 150 meg or so of stuff, but that most of that, of course, is the actual framework. The standard
Right.
releases that assume you have the framework installed is like 4 or 5 meg today.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then there's no actual installer. You just unzip it to whatever folder you want it to live in.
It's
That
like a
makes sense.
virtualized app. I didn't know you could do that with .NET. What did you call it? That
So
feature?
yeah, self-contained.
Self-contained. Okay.
Yeah, and then for other .NET apps that don't use Windows Forms, which is the UI that this is using, you can even have it do single file, where it'll actually embed all of those into a single file. But
Mm,
the Windows Forms UI
Yeah.
doesn't play well with that. So
mm.
Yeah. There used to be a product called Thinstall. I think it was developed by the guys who originally kind of founded crack.com way back in the 90s that you could do that,
mhm.
just generate a single executable. I didn't know you could do that with .NET.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Tim, I want to ask you about these other projects too, but
Oh,
before I do, uh, in App Refiner
mhm.
for imports, you mentioned that it will highlight unused imports. Do you have anything for splat imports?
You mean the ones with the wild card?
Wildcards. Thank you. Yes.
Um, no, there's no styler or
Okay.
linting rule for those today. Um,
Okay. Or anything that will auto um, identify, like if you say it, because here's the thing, and people feel completely different about this. This is like tabs versus spaces, maybe. But some people will just do wildcard imports all the time, and it's easier when you're coding. For me, I like to see all of the imports spelled out because for me, they show a dependency tree. So I
right.
don't have to look at 1,000 lines of people code to figure out what are we really using. I can just go right to the top and see the list of
Yeah.
imports. But having a way to clean up imports, or like some other IDEs will do that, where they'll auto
Yeah.
import, they'll clean up imports, they'll sort your imports, they'll delete unused imports, things like that. And I was just kind of curious.
Yeah. So a small correction, just in jest, is that the wild card used to be easier. Control Shift I is much easier now, right?
Right,
If you have
true. Don't even
Control Shift
import.
I, you don't even have to go up there anymore.
Right, just type it
Um,
out. Yeah, type it once. Yes, you're right. Based off of what you showed earlier, where you can just start typing and it will auto import with Control Shift I. Yes.
uh,
Mm.
if Here's one I forgot to show, if that's okay.
Yes.
We have a refactor here that will reorganize your methods to match the declared order in the class header. Sort methods,
There is experience speaking there.
and there it
Yes.
goes. And there,
Yes. Oh, look at that. That's amazing.
Your code reviewers will love you for that. Yeah.
This is amazing.
uh,
Yes. So, okay, now those other two projects that we saw in the GitHub
yes,
repository.
yeah. So we have DMS viewer.
Okay.
Um, yeah, DMS viewer. This is an application that allows you to open up DAT files that like from a DMS export, and you can view the tables, you can view the rows, the data, you can edit the data.
Wow.
Um, well, maybe not too common, but certainly a use case that we've had before is, we had like an old export of some data, but the product has since changed. Now there's a new column,
Yes.
and I
Mm.
can't export or I can't import the old data anymore. Well, you can use DMS viewer to open up that file and actually add that new column to the data so that it does import properly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then um, the other one is Trace Wizard. This was my attempt at a Trace Magic
Mm.
alternative.
Mm.
For those that have used Trace Magic before, they know that it can be finicky at times and crash or not load or whatever. And I'm not saying that this one doesn't. Just this was my attempt at something I felt was a little better. Um,
And Tim, I love this tool because it has so many other features. It's not just highlighting the code listing from the trace. It will grab all of the records that are queried or selected and provide those as a list. It provides all the SQL statements independently. You can export all the SQL statements as a script that
Hmm.
you can run in outside of, just opening up a SQL editor and run them all. So incredibly powerful tool.
let's see if I have a trace here. So you can see the execution path.
Hmm.
Uh, Ones that are highlighted yellow are slow by some
Mm,
configurable time.
Hmm.
wow.
Hmm.
Or actually, I'm sorry. I think it's highlight green is slow. The yellow means that an error happened somewhere in here, right? Like some subcall had an exception or whatever. You can get to those easier by going to the stack traces.
Right.
And from the stack trace, if you double click it, it'll take you to where that happened in the execution path, and that's red.
Yeah.
SQL statements, a list of all the people code objects that were executed.
Wow.
You can actually generate a SQL script, and so it will take all of these SQL statements and basically make a .SQL file. Updates, inserts, deletes are commented out, and then selects are, just how they are, kind of thing. And there's a bunch of sorting for the SQL by where clause from clause, the ones that errored. You want to see how many SQLs touch this table, kind of thing.
Right. Wow.
So, yeah. And then I don't know if I have handy. Look, columns fixed, columns old. I wonder what that was for. But yeah, so you can come in, you can see the fields, you
Yeah.
can see the metadata for the table, all the fields, and you can edit and so on, and then save. This does actually have a feature where you can do a similar DB connection with Bootstrap, and then you can actually compare the data in here with
Yep.
the data in the database.
Wow.
And then, generate SQL. If somehow you only have the DAT file and the import, you can actually rebuild the export script because the DAT file actually has the export clauses in it. So, and then a couple of configuration options. But
I've used both Trace Wizard and DMS Viewer many times. I DMS Viewer dug me out of many holes during my last big 9.2 upgrade, which was only a few years ago, 2 years ago. Priceless.
I'm glad you guys are getting use out of it.
Definitely are super helpful.
DMS Viewer started, by the way, just because I was looking at that DAT file, and I don't know if you've ever actually opened one up in Notepad.
Yes.
But I was just looking at that, and I was like, it's got to mean something, right? so what does it mean?
Yep.
And so there's a common theme, I guess, with like, I'll write the utility, one, because it's interesting, and two, I had some free time, and then it immediately becomes useful with the project that I was on. And DMS Viewer and Trace Wizard both fit that category. So,
but with any research and development you do, you kind of start with a puzzling question. How does that work, or what might I be able to do with this? And very quickly you turn it to, right, I've got a real problem, I need to solve this. And all three of these that you've shown today, Tim, they solve real problems. Seeing the app definer or app refiner. Did I say definer there?
You did.
That's not. Yeah, that's like a mix of designer and refiner.
Yeah.
Anyway, the app refiner, it just helps the developer with code quality, productivity, code reviews, real world problems being solved.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, some of the tooltips. I was taking this thing for a spin, like officially, like, okay, I'm going to use it today while I'm doing my day job. And there's a spot, I was looking for a particular string or something, right? And so Control F to find it, but then I was like, where am I? And I had to scroll to find the method, and I was like, this simply will not do. We have to fix this. And so that's how that tooltip was born. So now I can just hover and find out where I'm at.
Right. Yeah. And then as you're scrolling, sometimes you get lost and you miss the said method start and method end, and you miss that and you're in a different method already.
Yep.
Yeah.
Tim, what if you're working in 3-tier mode and you're not talking directly to the database server, but you're talking to Tuxedo here? Does it work during debug mode?
So, I guess I think App Refiner itself. So App Refiner's DB connection doesn't support the 3-tier, right? So the App Refiner's connection has to be the 2-tier or Bootstrap or a read-only DB credential. But App Refiner itself I guess, doesn't care how
Hmm.
app designer is talking to the database,
Right.
right? Whether it's directly or by proxy. So I don't think I haven't tested it. We don't have any environment that runs 3-tier.
You're talking to the code window here.
Yes. Yep.
You're right. How it got its data, how it got its code, whether it was a direct database connect or a tuxedo call in 3-tier mode.
Yeah. App Refiner doesn't care.
App
It just
Refiner
wants.
is not going to care. Yeah.
Yep. And so for the same reason, I suspect it will work like if you're in the debugger.
Mm,
What I don't know is if you open it and it's read only, right? Because you can have like read only like locked definitions.
mm.
Um,
Mm.
I suspect that like the the style. I don't know. I need to test that out. I don't know if we have an environment. Yeah, I test one easily where I can do that, but
Tim, what
um
about App Engine people code? That's just a regular people code
yes,
window, right?
yep,
And
yep.
as if this wasn't enough, what about HTML?
Let's HTML. I'm just gonna grab some PT1. It should. Let me grab. Yeah, so you get the
Okay.
code folding.
Yeah.
Um, you you can't do stylers, linters, refactors.
Mm,
Those are very much people code because it runs the people code parser
sure.
Right.
library and stuff. Um, yeah, and tooltips can either be parser based or not. So I mean, I guess you could do some sort of tooltips on non-people code windows, but by default you'll get the code collapsing.
Mm,
And then of course SQL does the code collapsing, but also the auto format. If you tell it to format SQL, it'll do that. If you don't tell it format SQL, it'll just leave it alone.
yeah.
That's that's it. I'm
Yeah.
I'm happy I got code folding. I'm gonna be honest. Everything else was was icing on the cake.
Yes.
And there's a lot of icing on the cake there, Tim. That's that's icing and cherries and
Yeah.
little sprinkles and
Sprinkles, yeah.
candles even.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
But that metaphor there, you know how it is. If it's all icing and no cake, we're not going to feel very good at the end there. Um, but that's not the case here. This has definitely got some good. This is good. This is good for you. It's not just icing.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say. So I showed um. I think this has it somewhere, right? So like this dot, and I can hover over this method, and it will show me the parameters where it should, if it's working.
For the tips. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what is in progress right now is actually supporting um if I had like some app class variable and I did that variable dot method, being able to hover over that and see
Oh,
that
sure.
class's method parameters.
Hmm.
Um,
Yes.
and then I hope to extend it to some of the built-ins, right? So like, of course, I'm drawing a blank on an example,
Yeah.
but
Like, for
like
example,
rosnet
create
get
record.
field, right?
Yeah.
Right, or yeah, create record, right? Now, I don't want to get into the business of like the auto suggest pop up because Tools already has one, and I
Yeah.
think those will clash.
Mm.
But if you had like uh, you know, local record, whatever, and then rec dot get field, right? You could hopefully at the end of this, you'll be able to hover over get field and see the parameter that it takes, right? Maybe
Right.
that's a bit of a silly example, but
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. You know
supported for
the
the
thing about you
built-ins.
mentioned the comments that are already there for parameters. I don't know what the rest of the community thinks, but I I don't like them because the ones that pop up, they don't tell me context. They just say
Yeah.
string, string, number, date. And I don't know, I was thinking,
What?
even if they had just the internal variable name, like string rec name, then I go, oh, that's the record name instead of just string
Yeah.
string.
Yeah, I don't like it either. I have it turned off.
Oh, there you go.
But so my issue, and I don't know if this is like an implementation detail, like on App Designer, or if it's Scintilla. But my issue with this is when I have this turned on, right, and I do, like this dot, and I know the method name that I want to call, but the auto
Yeah.
suggest has popped up, it eats all of the characters.
Yes, it
So like
does.
it breaks my flow of I want to type the method name, right? But it starts
Mm,
eating up the now I got to dismiss it every time I hit period. I got to dismiss it
Yes.
so I can keep typing.
Yes.
So
And sometimes when you type something, the characters end up on the wrong side of the period. Sometimes there's no
yeah,
period. It behaves, and sometimes it behaves differently if you click versus hit the enter key or the tab key.
right,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's certainly something App Refiner could do, right? Because
Hmm.
those auto suggest windows, it can all be controlled by messages too. I just don't know if I want to dabble in that at this point.
Maybe
But
that's where the community
I
comes
will
in
welcome
with the open source
contributions.
project. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
So um I the other thing I didn't mention is licensing
Thank
for
you.
the project. All of the utilities that we showed today, like DMS Viewer, Trace Wizard, and the new App Refiner will be licensed MIT, which is basically it's as is. You can do what you want with it, kind of thing. There's no real restrictions on what you can do with the project. So if a company wants to keep, I guess, a private copy or private fork of it, the license allows them to. So,
Fantastic.
and
mm.
yeah, and it's not like I think it's like GPL, right? Where like if you use this now, all your stuff is open source too.
Right.
So,
Right.
good old
Yes.
MIT.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, thank you for sharing this with us, Tim. And I know that as with all of your utilities, there will be future updates. So it'll be exciting to see what you do with this in the future as well. And for those watching, we'll be sure to include a link in the description to the GitHub repository for download. And I want to say thank you so much, Tim, for joining Graham and I to share details about this project.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Thank you for
very
your time.
exciting, Tim. Looking forward to getting our hands on it and using it. It's terrific. Nice one
Awesome.
to add to the collection there, Tim. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.